Spring 1943, the skies over France. German Luftwaffe aces, the self-proclaimed masters of European airspace, spotted something that made them laugh out loud. A massive, bloated American fighter lumbered into view, looking more like a flying refrigerator than a weapon of war. They called it Fliegen Milchflash, the flying milk bottle. This thing was enormous, weighing up to 8 tons fully loaded, nearly double their nimble Focke-Wulf 190s. German pilots figured this airborne whale would be a slow, easy kill, just more proof of crude American engineering. As one ace later admitted, "We laughed. We made a terrible mistake." That laughter would soon die in a storm of steel as they discovered the milk bottle was packed with 8 50 caliber machine guns, a revolutionary engine that owned the high altitudes, and a toughness that seemed almost supernatural. They mocked it right up until it started systematically erasing them from the sky. The air war over Europe in early 1943 was a deadly chess match, and the German Luftwaffe were the grandmasters. Their fighters were finely honed blades, instruments of precision and speed that had dominated for years. Into this arena came the American challenger, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. And honestly, it looked like a complete disaster. But it wasn't just the enemy who was skeptical. American pilots, many fresh from flight school, took one look at the P-47 and were absolutely horrified. When the first planes arrived at fighter groups in England, like the legendary 4th and 78th, the reaction was pure disbelief. Many of these guys had been flying the nimble British Spitfire, a thoroughbred of a fighter. The P-47, by contrast, felt like driving a cement truck. Its cockpit was unusually spacious, which was small comfort in a plane that felt sluggish and unresponsive. Pilots nicknamed it the Jug because its profile resembled a common milk jug. That name stuck, though it would later be recontextualized as short for juggernaut. Nobody was thinking about juggernauts in those early days, though. They were thinking about survival. The plane's designer was a brilliant Georgian engineer named Alexander Kartveli. The U.S. Army Air Corps had tasked him with creating a new interceptor that could take on the Luftwaffe's finest. Kartveli's solution was absolutely radical. Instead of designing another lightweight dogfighter, he built his entire aircraft around the most powerful engine he could find, the massive 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. To make it all work, he added a groundbreaking turbo supercharger system that required a truly enormous airframe. When he presented the design, Kartveli himself reportedly said, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." And a dinosaur it was. The P-47 weighed nearly 10,000 pounds empty. Fully loaded, it tipped the scales at over 17,000 pounds. For comparison, the Focke-Wulf 190, one of its main rivals, weighed less than 9,000 pounds fully armed. This immense weight had immediate and terrifying consequences. The Thunderbolt's climb rate was abysmal. In a classic turning dogfight, it was hopelessly outclassed. It took forever to get off the ground, needing long runways that weren't always available at forward airfields in England. What seemed like a brilliant concept on paper was turning into a nightmare in practice. The Jug's combat debut on April 8, 1943, was an absolute catastrophe. A fighter sweep over France had to be called off because the American radios didn't even work properly. A humbling setback that forced the entire fleet to be refitted with British equipment. When they finally did meet the enemy, the results were grim. In the first 2 months, P-47s flew over 2,000 missions, but only claimed 10 German planes while losing 18 of their own. Luftwaffe pilots learned the playbook fast. Get the clumsy American giant into a low-altitude turning fight, and it was an easy kill. The flying milk bottle seemed to be exactly what they thought, an oversized, underperforming disaster. Even American pilots began losing faith, especially the veterans of the 4th Fighter Group who bitterly missed their Spitfires. German commanders watched the arrival of this behemoth not with fear, but with pure arrogance. They saw a plane built with brute force in mind, lacking the tactical finesse they prided themselves on. They saw it as proof that Americans just thought bigger was always better, a philosophy they were certain would fail. The laughter in Luftwaffe mess halls was genuine and loud. But what they completely failed to grasp was that the P-47 wasn't designed for their kind of fight. It was designed for an entirely new kind of warfare. And the joke was about to be on them. So why were the Germans so catastrophically wrong? Because they were judging the Thunderbolt by their own standards, failing to look deeper and see the revolutionary heart beating inside this beast. The P-47's secrets weren't in its agility, but in its engine and the incredible system that fed it, allowing it to dominate where it mattered most: the frigid, thin air above 25,000 feet. The first secret was the engine itself, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. This wasn't just an engine. It was a 2,000 horsepower monument to engineering that would eventually be pushed to over 2,800 horsepower with water injection. For comparison, the superb engine in the Messerschmitt Bf 109 produced around 1,400 to 1,800 horsepower. The R-2800 was simply one of the most powerful piston engines of the entire war. Its radial design was also the key to the P-47's famous toughness. Unlike the liquid-cooled inline engines of the Spitfire or Bf 109, a radial engine cylinders are arranged in a circle. This created more drag, hence the P-47's bulky shape. But it also meant there was no fragile cooling system with long, vulnerable tubes carrying vital fluid. German pilots were used to seeing their cannon shells rip through an engine, sever a coolant line, and watch the plane fall from the sky in minutes. The R-2800, however, was a completely different animal. It was air-cooled, and its sheer mass meant it could absorb an unbelievable amount of punishment. There are countless stories of P-47s returning to base with entire cylinders shot clean off, the engine still chugging along like nothing happened. But what really separated this fighter from everything else in the sky was something even more ingenious. A powerful engine alone wasn't enough at high altitudes where the air gets thin, starving an engine of oxygen. Most fighters used a gear-driven supercharger spun directly by the engine. This worked, but it was essentially a parasite, robbing the engine of power, and its performance dropped off dramatically at high altitudes. Here's where the Thunderbolt's true secret weapon came in: its General Electric turbo supercharger. Instead of being driven by the engine, the turbo was powered by the engine's own hot exhaust, waste energy that would otherwise be lost. A mind-bogglingly complex network of ducts snaked from the engine down the belly of the plane to a turbine in the rear fuselage. This turbine used the exhaust to spin a compressor at over 20,000 RPM, scooping up thin, cold air, pressurizing it, and ramming it back into the engine. The result was nothing short of miraculous. While German fighters with their mechanical superchargers began gasping for air above 25,000 feet, the P-47's R-2800 was just hitting its stride. The turbo allowed the Thunderbolt to maintain its immense power all the way up to 30,000 feet and beyond. Up there, in the realm of the high-altitude bombers it was built to protect, the clumsy Jug became a thoroughbred. It was fast, responsive, and packed with energy its German adversaries just couldn't match. The Luftwaffe aces were being drawn into a new battlefield where all their advantages were stripped away. The flying milk bottle was revealing its first terrifying secret. It wasn't built to dance. It was built to hunt in an environment where nothing else could breathe. If the P-47's engine was its heart, its armament was its soul. German pilots, used to a balanced philosophy of firepower and ammunition, were about to meet an aircraft built on a uniquely American principle: overwhelming, unadulterated firepower. The Thunderbolt carried a staggering 8 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. This wasn't just a lot of guns, it was a flying artillery battery. With all 8 guns blazing, the P-47 could unleash over 100 rounds per second. Pilots didn't describe it as firing guns, they called it projecting a wall of lead. The ammunition load was just as massive, carrying up to 4,000 rounds. A Bf 109, by contrast, could exhaust its ammo in just a few short bursts. A Thunderbolt pilot could hold down the trigger for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. You didn't have to be a perfect shot, you just had to get the enemy somewhere in your sights, and let the sheer volume of fire do the rest. The guns were angled to converge at a specific distance, often around 300 yards. Anything caught in that convergence zone would be utterly shredded. The heavy, high-velocity 50 caliber slugs could punch through armor and shatter engine blocks. One Luftwaffe ace described facing this firepower as industrial execution. It changed air combat from a skilled duel into an act of industrial annihilation. But even this devastating firepower would have meant nothing if the plane couldn't survive long enough to deliver it. This firepower was mounted on an airframe that could take a terrifying amount of punishment. The P-47 was, without exaggeration, one of the toughest planes ever built. The cockpit was a veritable bathtub of armor plating. The air-cooled radial engine could absorb hits that would have vaporized a liquid-cooled engine, and its sheer size meant enemy rounds could often pass straight through without hitting anything vital. The stories of the P-47's durability are legendary, but one stands above all others. Major Robert S. Johnson's story on June 26, 1943 defies belief. Johnson's P-47 was ambushed and absolutely shredded by at least 21 cannon shells and hundreds of machine gun rounds. His canopy was shattered, his plane was on fire, and he was wounded. He tried to bail out, but the damaged canopy was stuck, trapping him inside the burning wreck. In a desperate dive, the flames miraculously went out. As he limped toward the English Channel, a lone Focke-Wulf 190 moved in for the kill. Unable to fight back, Johnson braced for the end. The German pilot made several passes, pouring fire into the helpless Thunderbolt. Finally, out of ammunition, the German pilot pulled up alongside the mangled P-47. He looked across at Johnson, rocked his wings in a salute to a man he thought was already a ghost, and turned for home. Johnson somehow flew that wreck, which had over 200 bullet holes, back to base and walked away. This became the Thunderbolt's second revelation. It wasn't just an engine, it was a fortress. Luftwaffe pilots, used to seeing targets disintegrate, now faced an enemy that simply refused to die. They'd pour ammunition into the giant American fighter only to watch in disbelief as it stubbornly flew on. The laughter was gone. In its place was a growing sense of dread. The P-47 was a weapon waiting for the right tactics. The early fumbles were the result of pilots trying to fight the Luftwaffe's game, a deadly mistake. But a new generation of shrewd commanders like Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group realized you don't send a heavyweight boxer to dance ballet. You teach him to use his power. The answer was a tactic as brutal as the plane itself: boom and zoom. The doctrine was simple: avoid turning dogfights at all costs. Instead, P-47 pilots used their engines' phenomenal high-altitude performance to climb above their opponents. From this perch at 30,000 feet or higher, they would scan the skies below for German fighters. Once a target was spotted, they would tip over and dive. And in a dive, the P-47 was absolutely untouchable. Its immense weight, a weakness in a climb, became its greatest asset. Gravity grabbed the 8-ton fighter and pulled it down with terrifying force. The Thunderbolt could reach speeds in a dive that would tear the wings off other aircraft, pushing well over 500 miles per hour. At these velocities, the P-47 became a guided missile. The attack was swift and devastating. A Thunderbolt would plummet out of the sun, its target often completely unaware until the sky erupted in tracers. The pilot had just a few seconds to line up a shot, squeeze the trigger, and unleash absolute chaos. Before the enemy could react, the Thunderbolt would be past him, using its incredible speed to zoom climb back to altitude, ready for another pass. There was no duel, no graceful exchange. It was a high-speed execution. This tactical shift transformed the P-47's effectiveness completely, making it the premier escort for bombers. By late 1943, German intelligence reports that had initially dismissed the P-47 now identified it as a deadly threat. The aircraft itself was also evolving with crucial upgrades. One of the most significant improvements was the bubble canopy. The original Razorback design had a huge blind spot to the rear, a fatal flaw in aerial combat. The new teardrop-shaped canopy gave the pilot an unobstructed 360 view of the battlefield. Another game-changer was a new paddle blade propeller. Its wider blades bit into the air more effectively, dramatically improving the P-47's takeoff, acceleration, and most importantly, its rate of climb. The sluggish jug they had once mocked could now climb right along with them. With these improvements, the P-47 became a truly formidable fighter. It had the visibility and climb rate to complement its speed, firepower, and toughness. The days of laughing at the flying milk bottle were a distant, bitter memory. Now, when the Luftwaffe looked up and saw those bulky silhouettes circling high above, they felt a cold knot of fear. The sky was no longer theirs. As 1944 dawned, the new P-51 Mustang began arriving in Europe. With its incredible range, the Mustang was perfect for escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. For a lesser aircraft, this might have meant obsolescence. But for the Thunderbolt, it was the beginning of a second life where its talents for destruction would be unleashed with even greater ferocity. The P-47's powerful engine meant it could carry a staggering payload, up to 2,500 pounds of bombs, a load that rivaled some light bombers, plus an array of up to 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets. This transformed the high-altitude Hunter into a low-level angel of destruction. The Germans came to call it the Jabo, short for Jag bomber, and they said the word with pure terror. In the lead-up to D-Day, Allied air power was tasked with crippling the German war machine, and the P-47 was the perfect tool for the job. The effect was absolutely cataclysmic. Flying at treetop level, P-47s roamed across France, hunting anything that moved. Their targets were the arteries of the German army, railways, supply depots, and troop convoys. A flight of Thunderbolts could appear in seconds, their 850 calories ripping a column of trucks into a chain of burning wrecks. Their rockets could obliterate a tank. Their bombs could crater airfields and destroy bridges. It was in this role that the P-47's legendary toughness became its most vital asset. Low-level attack is incredibly dangerous work, flying directly into a blizzard of ground fire. But the Thunderbolt's rugged airframe and air-cooled engine could soak it up and keep flying. P-47s would routinely return to base riddled with holes, trailing smoke, yet their pilots were alive. On D-Day and in the brutal weeks that followed, the P-47 became the German soldiers' worst nightmare. German tank commanders who once ruled the battlefield were now paralyzed. Moving during daylight invited swift and violent destruction from above. The distinctive roar of the R-2800 engine became a sound of impending doom, inducing a psychological condition among German troops known as Jabo fever. When the sound of a thunderbolt was heard, soldiers dove for cover, knowing a storm was only seconds away. The statistics from this period are absolutely staggering. From D-Day to the end of the war, P-47 pilots would go on to claim the destruction of 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. They systematically dismantled the German logistical network, starving the front lines of everything they needed to fight. As the German commander-in-chief in the West bitterly complained, Allied air power led by the Jabos had made it impossible to conduct any meaningful troop movements. The joke had become a juggernaut, and the transformation was complete. But the story of the P-47's victory isn't just about technology or tactics. It's the story of a clash between two totally different philosophies of warfare. The German approach relied on a core of highly skilled, irreplaceable aces. The American approach was one of industrial, overwhelming force. The P-47 was the perfect symbol of this doctrine. The sheer number of Thunderbolts produced is hard to comprehend. Between 1941 and 1945, Republic Aviation churned out over 15,600 P-47s. At its peak, a new Thunderbolt was rolling off the assembly line every single hour. This was an industrial tsunami the German war machine simply could not counter. While German factories struggled under constant bombing to produce a few hundred fighters a month, America was burying them under an avalanche of steel. This miracle extended to every part of the plane. Over 125,000 R-2800 engines were built, not just by Pratt & Whitney, but by car giants like Ford and Chevrolet. This ensured a limitless supply of planes and spare parts. When a P-47 was damaged, it was often repaired and flying within days. When a German fighter was lost, its replacement was uncertain, and the loss of its pilot was a catastrophic blow. The pilots themselves were another product of this industrial-scale approach. While the Luftwaffe's training program withered from fuel shortages and constant combat, the U.S. Army Air Forces built a vast training pipeline. Before ever seeing combat, an American pilot received hundreds of hours of flight instruction. In stark contrast, by late in the war, a new Luftwaffe pilot was lucky to have 100 hours of total flight time before being thrown into battle. The Americans weren't just building more planes, they were building more pilots. nearly 200,000 of them. The loss of a pilot, while always a tragedy, was a replaceable part in a vast machine. The final piece was logistics. The P-47 was a thirsty machine, but America's industrial might ensured that high-octane fuel, ammunition, and everything else was available in seemingly infinite quantities. This was the war the Luftwaffe could never win. They weren't just fighting the P-47, they were fighting the entire industrial capacity of the United States. By May 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had carved its name into history. The plane, once mocked as a flying milk bottle, a clumsy joke, had become a legend. It ended the war with an official kill-to-loss ratio of over 4-to-1, having flown over 500,000 missions and destroying thousands of enemy aircraft and tens of thousands of vehicles. Its journey from underdog to dominator was a story of adaptation, of ruthlessly exploiting its strengths. It was a story of technological innovation, harnessing the power of a revolutionary engine to conquer the high-altitude frontier. And above all, it was a story of industrial philosophy, proving that wars are won not just by tactical brilliance, but by the relentless, overwhelming power of mass production. Perhaps the ultimate testament came from Germany's General of Fighters, Adolf Galland. When asked what truly defeated the Luftwaffe, he didn't point to a single battle. He pointed to the sky over Germany, darkened by swarms of American fighters that could hunt his own pilots to extinction. The P-47 was the brutal instrument of that dominance. Its legacy lives on today. The P-47's design philosophy, a heavily armed, incredibly tough aircraft built to support ground troops, has a direct spiritual successor in the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, better known as the Warthog. The story of the P-47 is a perfect reversal of fortune. It begins with laughter and ends with fear. It starts as a joke and finishes as a juggernaut. It's a timeless reminder that in the deadly calculus of war, the most underestimated weapon can often become the most decisive.